exponent of a sound that has made hundreds of millions move their skeletons to tropical, rhythmic cadences. Today we're going to talk about a man who captivated crowds of fans on every stage he stepped on to sing. Since his time at the Palladium, Yankee Stadium, Madison Square Garden, nightclubs in Sabana Grande and Chicago, Bohíos, Sabaneros, and even in Japanese lands. Salsa is a genre that has marked many generations, with timbales, bongos, gyros, maracas, and congas, accompanied by piano, double bass, trumpets, flute, and violin. It has emerged and has been embraced by the popular sectors of Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and Panama, and the tough streets of the Latino Bronx in New York, just as it has also livened up the parties of the high society of businessmen, designers, filmmakers, politicians, drug traffickers, and even the average pedestrian. Héctor Lavoe is one of the greatest exponents of salsa, a Caribbean genre that burst onto stages far beyond the geography where it was created. The life of this man from Ponce was typical of his time, marked by the excesses of the 70s and 80s. In a New York fueled by Pablo Escobar's cocaine, who in fact was one of his biggest fans. Today, on La Nueva, the new encyclopedia, we're going to cover the life of this unique Puerto Rican singer, who to this day remains the emblem of a rhythm, a genre, and a culture. This is the story of Héctor Juan Pérez Martínez, better known as Héctor Lavoe, a life of rise, fame, and a fleeting fall. This is Reynaldo Carrillo Vilches. For those asking how to support La Nueva Enciclopedia, we've launched a Patreon with exclusive documentaries on the most controversial topics, with live seminars taught by us, and with several more benefits. Your support is essential to keep this project alive. You can find the link below. And in case you don't have an international card for Patreon, we have several payment options for you. You will also be included in the community. We'll be waiting for you there. And without further ado, let's start today's video. The street is a concrete jungle. Born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, on September 30, 1946, the Caribbean singer-songwriter and composer was the son of Francisca Martínez and Luis Pérez. Héctor. He grew up in the humble community of Machuelo Abajo, inspired by the musical life of his father, his mother, and his grandparents. He grows up in an environment where he is encouraged to learn to sing and to get to know the world of musical notes, verses and measures that would accompany him throughout his troubled life. As he grew up, he saw his father, with his bad temper, get into street fights. And he got to know a side of music that people don't usually talk about, the side where talent struggles to pay the bills. Throughout his childhood, he was influenced by the music of singers like Jesus Sanchez Chirazo and Daniel Santos, artists with whom he would later record. After achieving fame, Héctor learned to play the saxophone in public school, sharing desks with Papo Luca, a renowned jazz musician and instrumentalist from the Fania Orchestra, and with Jose Febles, one of the best salsa arrangers. Because of his tone of voice, he learned to sing boleros, with which he learned to woo girls with impeccable diction. And with the surge of hormones typical of adolescence and the impulsiveness that comes with it, Héctor decides to drop out of school and to start singing to girls full-time, against his father's wishes, and that means dropping out, starting to sing to girls. Diction in adolescence, and with the surge of hormones that comes with it, dropping out, singing with impeccable diction in adolescence, boy, the peak of the peak. When he arrived in the Big Apple, Héctor was disappointed by what he saw in a rather hostile New York. He settles in Spanish Harlem and lives with his sister Priscilla, along with his friends from Puerto Rico, and everything that comes with it. Leaving adolescence, Héctor enters his teenage peak, noticing girls and standing out in nightclubs across the Bronx, Spanish Harlem, and Lower Manhattan. It's around that area that he becomes friends with Russell Cohen from the band called the New Yorkers, with whom he would record the album Esta de Bala. He starts singing in various bars around the city, takes part in several orchestras like the Caco All Stars, the New York, and finally Johnny Pacheco's Fania. It's from there that he adopts the name that makes him famous, Héctor Lavoe, a name with a French sound that he chooses, inspired by the nickname of the singer Felipe Rodriguez, who was called Lavoe. Between recording sessions and gigs, Héctor makes a living as a painter, porter, dishwasher, messenger, and janitor. His moment of rise was yet to come. Lavoe's voice and style were standing out more and more in the New York music scene. In the latter part of 1966, he met the famous Willie Colón, who already had his own orchestra, while Lavoe was the vocalist for the New Yorkers. Their relationship was purely professional then. In 1967, Johnny Pacheco offered Willie Colón the chance to record an album with Fania Records and asked him to change his singer. Pacheco and Colón offered the job to Lavoe, but he refused the first time, arguing that the Fania sound, quote, was weak, very weak, unquote. And since they hadn't offered him to join the orchestra, but only to record an album, he passed. However, he would later accept the initial offer. The first album that Héctor Lavoe recorded with Willie Colón's orchestra was called El Malo in 1967. A 30-minute long play featuring styles like mambo, jazz, boogaloo, guaguancó, sinalín, motsanco, and son montuno. The following year, The Hustler was released, another 36-minute album in which Lavoe debuted as a composer with songs like Quelio and Montero. In 1968, Héctor had his first son, named José Alberto Pérez, with a woman named Carmen Castro. In 1969, the album Guisando was released, an album in which Héctor made his debut on the cover, both on the front and in the credits, with songs like Guisando, El Titán, and Oiga, Señor, where they experimented with post-boogaloo sounds and a clearer salsa style. Then, at the beginning of the decade, in 1970, Cosa Nuestra was released, an album that established that pair of salsa musicians as the cream of the crop among New York Latinos. That album achieved national and international success, became a gold record, and is considered one of the best albums in the history of salsa because almost all of its tracks were hits. Cheche, Colé, Juana Peña, and Ausencia are just three of the great singles from that album. Almost without realizing it, in just a few years, his musical career as a golden member of the Fania Orchestra was reaching an international success that, for him, had previously only been a fanciful thought. When he put himself, shortly after having a child with Carmen Castro, Héctor Lavoe decided to marry one of his fans, whom he had gotten pregnant a few months earlier, named Nilda Roman, nicknamed Poochie. She would become his wife, with whom he would have a tumultuous relationship based on physical, psychological, and emotional abuse, as well as drug abuse and infidelity on both sides, in a series of romances that accompanied him throughout his career. In Poochie, and Héctor conceive Héctor Jr., the couple's only son, who would later die from a self-inflicted gunshot wound while mishandling a pistol. Poochie was by Lavoe's side throughout his life, continuing with his musical career, which was taking off. In 1971, La Gran Fuga and Asalto Navideño were released, and then, in 1972, El Juicio came out, with the classic song, and also from that album. Highlights include songs like Timbalero and Piranha, which showcased Willie Colón's creative ability to take Afro-Caribbean influences such as samba, bomba, boleros, and rumba, and bring them together in a single album. That year, 1971, full of stardom and fame, would be the time when Héctor Lavoe began to develop a strong cocaine habit, which caused him to arrive late to concerts. He would have altercations with Willie Colón and the musicians, in addition to affecting his ability to sing. For that reason, he admitted himself unsuccessfully several times to different rehabilitation centers. In August 1971, Fania Records managed to reach an unprecedented level of sales. Then, in 1973, the album called Lo Mato was released with its main track, Cali Luna, Cali Sol, where Colón highlights social issues. New York, plagued by violence. From 73 to 75, the work pace slowed down, partly due to Willie Colón's desire to produce and be a solo artist, and partly because of Lavoe's problems. Together, they would only release 3 more albums. However, this would mark a new stage for Héctor Lavoe. In 1973, as Fania Records expanded commercially, the distance between its 2-star salsa artists was a hard blow. Willie Colón decides to dissolve his orchestra. On his side, the most solid singer and best-selling artist of Fania, the one with the most appeal and following among all its artists, and the greatest representative of that new sound, now didn't have any musicians. And with that pause, the owners of Fania Records decided to move Héctor Lavoe to center stage as a soloist. In 1974, an album called Lavoe's with the old Willie Colón Rhythmic Orchestra, which was his orchestra. Of course, it had slight and noticeable changes, 2 trombones, 2 trumpets. From that album, the first hit single is El Todo Poderoso, which would become the new sound of New York salsa. That single had a novel sound because of Hector's voice, in an arrangement by Willie Colón from the control room, and the religious references in the lyrics, which, without mentioning Cuban Santeria, point to elements of syncretized Christian religion, and religion as well. It would be the second theme that would make Héctor Lavoe's voice successful, with the song Rompe Saragüe, a piece where Hector gets the most out of his orchestra's musical talent and his own skills as a singer. His debut album establishes him as a solo salsa artist, catapults him to another level of the stratosphere, and puts him on par with salsa artists of the caliber of Ismael. One song makes Héctor Lavoe soar among the clouds and brings Fania Records huge amounts of money. His songs resonated like few others with that Caribbean generation in the 1970s. In 5 years, from 1973 to 1978, Lavoe only recorded 3 albums, but they were albums with a lot of impact. So much so that he outsold Ismael Miranda, who released 6 albums in that same period but couldn't come close to his sales. The Ponceño, whose songs simply kept playing everywhere in the world, in nightclubs, on the radio, at the beach, wherever you went. His second solo album, titled De Ti Depende Depende, was another collaboration with Willie Colón behind the scenes, this time in a studio improved by the Prophets, with better production and better recording. This album features the famous song Periódico de Ayer, a hit to this day, and a song he never stopped performing during his solo career. However, at that time, Lavoe's live performances did not achieve the expected results. Not only because of his drug problems, which prevented him from responsibly meeting the scheduled dates and times, but also because the numerous dance numbers, which were usually songs that lasted over 6 minutes, were exhausting. For him, 1977 was also a year when Héctor Lavoe was the global reference point for salsa. Even though there were artists like Oscar de Leon, Rubén Blades, and Ismael Rivera on the scene, saying salsa was the same as saying Héctor Lavoe. On one hand, Oscar de Leon was too Venezuelan. On the other, Ismael Rivera and Rubén Blades didn't sell enough, and Willie Colón simply wasn't on the radar anymore. On the other hand, being the #1 in salsa at that time caused some wear and tear and overexposure for the artist. So by 1977, disaster. Lavoe suffered a major disaster, an attack of depression that took him away from the stage and forced him to cut a tour short, undergoing treatment for his drug addiction. Jessie, was she an inspiration? Fortunately, he managed to overcome this situation, at least for the time being. After that, he returned to perform in Colombia, in Panama, also in the United States, in Mexico, and in other countries. However, that same year, the combination of fame, white powder, and rum, the bad and eternal advisors of the salsa singer from Ponce, tripped him up again. He had to delay the recording of his album and undergo alternative rehabilitation treatments at the hands of Cuban healers and Dominican charlatans who took huge amounts of money from him without good results. Lavoe, fed up and disappointed, checks himself into a psychiatric clinic in Madrid and feels the harassment of the tabloid press during his journey through these Iberian lands. Despite all this, Héctor Lavoe keeps going with his passion, which was music. In 1978, he recorded the album Comedia, dressed as Charlie Chaplin, with the hit that would make him a legend, and that is still played today. A composition by Ruben Blades, at the request of Willie Colón, called Héctor the Singer, a song about his life and career that became his signature theme. The singer in this way, he arrives in the 80s. Those were times of ups and downs. Although he doesn't break box office records wherever he performs, he does several shows all over the world. He fills Madison Square Garden with Fania, then travels with Wilfrido Vargas to Cuba and performs at the Carlos Marx Theater. He records songs and tribute albums to artists like Benny Moré and Felipe Perella. Throughout the 80s, Lavoe doesn't stop using drugs, and he increases his cocaine habit for the why. It's with this lifestyle of needles and excess that he develops acquired immunodeficiency syndrome at some point during the decade. It was in 1988 when he found out that he had this dreaded disease in its advanced stage. On his side, by 1988, salsa was already a thing of the past. It was in decline and hopeless. Unable to recover those years of glory, he still devoted himself to the only thing he knew how to do: sing. In June 1988, Héctor would give a concert that would mark the restart of his career in Puerto Rico. Here he would share the stage with Ray Barretto, with Luis Perico Ortiz, with the Tumbao of Johnny Pacheco, and compete with El Conde Rodriguez. Spectacle. The promoters realized that less than 300 tickets had been sold by the 21st. This was because his presence and performance coincided with other festivities that were being offered for free. Despite everything, Héctor offered to sing for that small number of people for free. But there were conflicts between the representatives, so in the end, the promoter Ralph Mercado decided to call off the concert. But in response to this, the singer ordered the orchestra to continue playing, since he didn't want to disappoint the people who had paid to see him. This only caused the event promoters to turn off the lights and sound on stage, making it impossible for the performance to go on. This whole situation made the singer's mood much worse, and a day after returning to the hotel from the failed concert, and after an argument with his wife, he attempted suicide by jumping from the 9th floor. He suffered many injuries all over his body, including fractures in both legs, his right arm, and some ribs. This forced the doctors who treated him to implant titanium plates in his fractures. All the abuse that the voice was being subjected to caused his body to deteriorate more quickly, since by that time he was not only suffering from acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, but he also had diabetes. After this, there was one last event that would deeply affect him and the generation of musicians who were with him. On September 2, 1990, the Fania All-Stars performed along with other groups in New Jersey at the 15th edition of the Salsa Festival, organized by Ralph Mercado. For this event, Lavoe was announced as one of the members of the Fania All-Stars who would be honored that night while still alive. This not only sparked the curiosity of the audience, but also generated strong controversy behind the scenes. Because Willie Colón, who was supposed to participate that night, withdrew from the show in protest, harshly criticizing the decision to include Héctor. Lavoe, who was deeply ill and could barely handle himself, seemed irresponsible to him. However, Lavoe himself agreed. Maybe this was justified by his desire to relive those glory days. Hector arrived at the sports venue with his wife, Pucci, and some relatives. The first thing he wanted to do was dress just like his fellow singers did before, in Pucci. He went out to ask for help from the dressing room, since Hector, who was quite thin and haggard, couldn't dress himself. Once he was dressed, and after Cheo Feliciano, Ismael Miranda, and Celia Cruz had sung, it was time for the one everyone was waiting for, Héctor Lavoe, who was welcomed with hugs from his fellow performers and a thunderous ovation from the audience, who hadn't seen him in years. His fellow performers thought he was in condition to sing, and that's when the salsa musician Johnny Pacheco started playing the chords of the classic song Mi Gente. They handed the microphone to Lavoe, and for 5 minutes he tried to sing, without any success. He mumbled things that couldn't be understood, so the sound engineer turned the microphone volume down to a minimum. The other Fania singers who were on stage, except for Ismael Quintana, who stepped down from the stage because he couldn't stand to see him like that. His companions and friends also began to sing the song, more with the intention of supporting their companion than continuing with something that had turned into a dramatic scene. The event ended with a rushed version of Ponte Duro. When the concert was over, Pacheco threw the microphone on the floor and started crying with his back to the audience and facing his orchestra. Cheo Feliciano was also crying and tried to hide it with a smile. Ray Barreto leaned over his congas, while Roberto Roena was paralyzed next to his. Hector Zarzuela put his trumpet aside and covered his face with a handkerchief. Pucci was calming Hector. Behind the stage, because he couldn't sing, the media described this performance as the night when Lavoe sang in silence. Héctor Lavoe suffered a stroke in 1991 that took away the mobility of his mind and body. He couldn't sing or speak. He would end up alone without friends or money, receiving medical treatment in a New York hospital. 2 years later, Héctor Lavoe died on June 29, 1993, due to cardiovascular complications secondary to his long-standing infection with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. He was buried in St. Raymond Cemetery in the Bronx, and later in 2002, his remains were transferred to his hometown of Ponce in Puerto Rico. Héctor Lavoe's legacy is his music, a short life of 46 years filled with excess and fame that ended at a time when salsa had already become something else, giving way to Caribbean rhythms of other dimensions. They will always recognize in Lavoe and those around him the eternal symbols of a time when Caribbean music and its genres were, for the first time, a global reference. Thank you all very much for watching this video. I remind you that your support means a lot to us by leaving your comments, giving us a like, subscribing to the channel, sharing the video with all your friends, and clicking the bell to activate notifications. This was Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches speaking to you. This is the New Encyclopedia. As always, we thank you for all your support and many blessings to all of you.